8 of the fantasy football season. And here's quarterback starter sit every matchup in every game this week. First game, Baltimore Ravens at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So right here, Lamar Jackson, the last few weeks has been a struggle for him in fantasy football. And this matchup obviously isn't great versus a pretty solid Tampa Bay Buck defense, even though the Bucs have struggled over the last couple weeks, especially ball games where they were favored to win. But anyway, here, Lamar Jackson, he's a start no matter what each and every week, even with the struggles and even with this Tampa Bay Buck team playing better at home than they have on the road. And like I said, the struggles have been consistent now over the last couple weeks here for this Buck team. So I think Jackson in this one could run for a decent amount of yards, probably pass for 1 or 2 touchdowns. And he's a guy you're starting each and every week. Now to Tom Brady. Tom Brady, it's been a tough season for him, no doubt about it. After he went on a quick retirement in the offseason and returned in a month and a half later, but Tom Brady I still would start in this game. This Baltimore secondary's a little bit leaky, and this ball game we could see a Thursday night shootout. So right now, as long as Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are healthy, which they've been over the last couple weeks, Tom Brady's getting yards. He just has to put points on the board in terms of throwing touchdowns, and this week I got him as a start. Next ball game's Denver Broncos and the Jacksonville Jaguars taking place in London. So right here, Russell Wilson, it looks like he might come back in this ball game. He says he's practicing, he's good to go. And Hackett, the head coach, as well, saying Russ looks ready to go here, which is surprising after I thought he would have been out multiple weeks with his hamstring injury. But Russell Wilson, even if he plays in this one, he's not a guy I'm going to start on my fantasy roster. He's a guy that's only won over 20 fantasy points twice this whole season, and a guy that just doesn't have a good rapport with his wide receivers and not getting the job done. Brett Rife, and if he starts by chance in this one, you saw what he did last week versus the New York Jets. Not much, and you can't trust him in this situation. Now to the Jacksonville side of things. Trevor Lawrence, the last 2 games, he's been solid for fantasy football. But right here, it's a tough matchup. This Bronco D, if it's one thing that's consistent on this team, it's this defense making stops and keeping offenses down to a low point total. So right here, I don't like the matchup for Lawrence. I know I got added in a decent amount of fantasy leagues, but this week here, I have him as a sit. Now to the Cardinals at the Minnesota Vikings. So Kyler Murray, it's been an up and down season so far here, but to be honest, quarterback's been one of the toughest positions this year to gauge in fantasy football. But Kyler Murray's still a guy who will go out there and start on my fantasy roster. Last week, it was good to see him rush for more yards in that ball game. And when you could get a wide receiver like DeAndre Hopkins back in your starting lineup, that's a big boost no matter what. So he's a start this week in a potential shootout at Minnesota. Now to Kirk Cousins, he's a guy who would start this week. This Arizona secondary, not that great. And when you got one of the best receivers, if not the best receiver in the league, Justin Jefferson here, it's pretty much hard to bench Cousins each and every week. Unless he's on the road in prime time is pretty much the only time. But right here with good receivers, with a pretty good matchup, and coming off a bye being refreshed, I got him as a start this week. Now to the Dolphins at the Detroit Lions. So right here, Tua Tagovailoa finally came back. And he came back pretty quickly, I thought, here, after only a few weeks out with a significant concussion. But he looked decent in the first half of that ball game versus the Steelers. And the Steelers made the adjustments. With this Lions secondary, one of the worst in the league here. And he gives up top 5 in fantasy points to quarterbacks on the year. So to win this one, got 2 great weapons in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And I think these guys get him going once again in this one. And I like Tua as a start. Last week, he looked healthy. Last week, it looked like no limitations, and he's good to go in this one. Jared Goff, the last couple weeks here, has been a down week. But the thing here with Goff, he's only usable at home as Jared Goff. On the road, he's a guy that you see each and every week. But this week in a borderline matchup versus the Miami Dolphins that do give up the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season, I got Goff as a borderline guard. Amon St. Brown, we don't know if he's going to play in this ball game. He was banged up early with a concussion-type injury versus the Dallas Cowboys in Week 7. So right here, I'm just going to hold off on Jared Goff and use him as a borderline option. Unless, obviously, you have a lot of bye weeks or an injured quarterback where you can't find the quarterback, I would use him. But this week, if you could stay away from him, he's a 50-50 borderline option. Out to the Chicago Bears at the Dallas Cowboys. Justin Fields, I'll give him credit where credit is due. He's been a good fantasy quarterback, better than a real-life quarterback over the last 3 weeks of the season. But this week here, toughest test to date versus this vicious Dallas Cowboy defensive line here. Micah Parsons, he's getting to quarterbacks. DeMarcus Lawrence, he's looked good for the first time in years. Here is DeMarcus Lawrence. Brandon Williams, the rookie, he had a great game last week. And the D-line also trading for Hankins from the Las Vegas Raiders. So this Cowboy D-line ready to go. You know they're going to try to stop Fields from running, because if Fields don't get out of the pocket and make things happen, that's where obviously he don't put up fantasy points, and you see with his wide receivers and night tight ends put up numbers. So in a tough matchup this week here, I almost had him as a borderline to start, but I'm going to sit him in this one. And Dak Prescott came back last week, and he wasn't impressive, no doubt about it. But this week here, in his second week back in the offense, and with Ezekiel Elliott possibly out in this ball game here, Dak Prescott, he's a guy that I'm going to roll the dice in this one and start. And if Dak can't get the job in this one done versus the Chicago Bears, now he's a borderline option for most weeks. Now to the next ball game, Las Vegas Raiders at the New Orleans Saints. So right here, Derek Carr, I got him as a start. I know he's pretty much maxing out at 22 fantasy points this season here is Derek Carr. But like I said, quarterback's been a weak position in fantasy football, and a position that's not really getting the job done and putting up a lot of dud performances from pretty good quarterbacks. So right here in a good matchup in New Orleans, indoor game, fast track, Devontae Adams, I don't think if Lattimore is going, even if Lattimore plays in this one, which we don't know for sure yet, I think Adams has a good game, and Derek Carr obviously gets those numbers as well, so I got him as a start. And now to the Saints side of things, Andy Dalton, I know last week in garbage time he had a monster ball game going over 35 fantasy points, but this week here, tougher matchup versus the Raiders. Last week it was just a lot of garbage and underneath stuff in the third and mid-third, end of the fourth quarter to the end of the fourth quarter in that ball game. So right here, we don't know if Dalton's starting, and Jameis Winston, we don't know if he's starting as well. So it's been hush-hush who's going to be the starting quarterback in this ball game. But I don't want to deal with it in this one. So I've got Dalton and Winston, whoever plays as a sit now to the Carolina Panthers at the Atlanta Falcons. So right here, P.J. Walker, he had a good ball game, one of the best of his career, if not the best, so far in his early NFL career. But he's still a guy here, you can't trust him. Only in deeper leagues, 16-team leagues, or 2 quarterback leagues with a bye, you could trust him. But this week, yeah, I know it's a decent matchup on paper versus the Atlanta Falcons. But I got him as a sit this week. Marcus Mariota, on the other hand, I know he's been struggling. I know he really hasn't done much over the last few weeks here. But at home, Marcus Mariota does put up fantasy numbers, and he does have a favorable matchup versus the Panthers. I know the Panthers last week shut down that Tampa Bay Buck offense to only 3 points, but right here on the road, it's a different type of game, another division game, and I think Mariota could put up serviceable fantasy points, anywhere from 17 to 20 points. Now to the Patriots at the New York Jets. So right here, Mac Jones, he came back, then Bailey Zappi came back in this ball game as well here. In the second half, they were splitting for the first half, and then Zappi the whole second half played on Monday Night Football. But Zappi got off to the hot start and then fizzled out versus a decent Chicago Bear defense. But in this one here, Zappi, he's a guy I wouldn't start in this one after what we saw. And Mac Jones couldn't really get anything going, and he's probably not 100% as well. So both Patriot quarterbacks I would sit in this one. This Jet defense is what's carrying them right now, especially with Breece Hall out now. These guys have to step up on defense even more to win ball games for the Jets, and I think they do it trying to make a statement victory versus the division rival Patriots. Now to Zach Wilson. Wilson, he's come back. I know the Jets are 4-0 with him, but there's not much to say. Just look at the numbers and look at the completion rate. Zach Wilson's not getting the job done. All his wide receivers and Tyler Conklin's numbers have gone down in the receiving game. And now to miss a monster piece like Breece Hall out for the season here, it's going to be even tougher, in my opinion, for Zach Wilson. And plus, versus a good defense, he's a sit this week. Now to the Steelers at the Philadelphia Eagles. Kenny Pickett, I know he's a rookie. I know there's going to be growing pains. But versus this tough Eagle front line who just traded for Robert Quinn as well here, there's no way I'm starting Kenny Pickett. The last couple weeks, he really hasn't been good. Coming off a concussion as well. And he's an easy sit this week. Jalen Hurts, he's a top 5 quarterback each and every week. Is Hurts. He's Pittsburgh Steelers at the Philadelphia Eagles. So right here, Kenny Pickett, he's been struggling so far since he's been named the starter over here for the Steelers team. So right now, versus a tough defensive line who just acquired Roman. This week versus a tough defensive line that just acquired Roman Quinn, who adds another monster pass rusher to this D-line and this defense here. There's no way I'm going to start Kenny Pickett. I know he's got some decent weapons in Deontay Johnson and George Pickens on this offense, but still, it's going to be tough to trust him in this situation, and we just haven't seen it yet from the rookie. Now on to Jalen Hurts. He's a start each and every week, a top 5 quarterback each and every week. Here's Jalen Hurts, in my opinion. This Eagle offense is rolling. He's got great weapons in A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Dallas Goedert. And Miles Sanders will look pretty decent as well for the majority of the season. So right here versus shaky secondary over there in Pittsburgh, and probably a game where T.J. Watt won't return here. Jalen Hurts is a must-start in this one. The next ball game, Tennessee Titans at the Houston Texans. So right here, Ryan Tannehill, he got banged up in that Week 7 ball game when we saw Willis coming into the game. But right here, Ryan Tannehill, he's just a guy you can't trust in fantasy football over the last few seasons. He don't have a lot of weapons on the outside. Obviously, he has a great wide running back in Derrick Henry, but besides that, no one else is really making plays on this Tennessee offense. And I know it's a good matchup on paper, but at best, he's a borderline option. Now to the Texans side of things, Davis Mills. In this one, I think he's good for a few turnovers. This Tennessee defense has been playing better. And last week, they pretty much ended Matt Ryan as a starter over there in Indianapolis, including a pick six. So this Titan defense has been playing aggressive. And that's just the way Mike Vrabel likes him to play. So in this week here versus a weak offensive line and a not-so-great quarterback in Davis Mills, I think this defense tees off on him. And Mills is a definite sit this week now to the New York Giants at the Seattle Seahawks. So right here, Daniel Jones over the last few weeks here, he's been putting up fantasy points. And he gets a lot of rushing yards in the run game here. He gets at least anywhere from 4 to 8 fantasy points weekly running the football. I know last week versus Jacksonville, he went over 100 yards rushing as Daniel Jones. So right now, this Giant team 6-1. Daniel Jones, he's making plays with his legs. I know he has a lack of weapons on the outside of wide receiver, but he's still getting the job done. And the Seattle secondary isn't all that great. So the Giants here now with all the hype around them and stuff. We'll see if Daniel Jones can get it going. But this week here, I think he could get it going. And he's a start in a top 12 quarterback option. Now to Geno Smith, I got him in the start as this game. We know DK Metcalf most likely out in this ball game here for the Seattle Seahawks. But Geno Smith, he's been pretty solid this season in fantasy football. I know over the last couple weeks the numbers have dropped off a little bit here, but he's still a guy putting anywhere from 17 to 20 fantasy points. And the landscape of quarterback right now in fantasy football is not a good one. So guys just putting up 17, 20 fantasy points, you'll take at this point of the season here in Week 8. So he's a start now to the 49ers. At the Rams, Jimmy Garoppolo, a borderline start, even though over the last few weeks he's put up more than 20 fantasy points in that time in each game is Jimmy G. But this week here, Rams coming off bye. You know, this is a big game for the Rams here after struggling offensively and even defensively for the majority of the season. So Jimmy G at best, I got as a borderline option versus a pretty talented defense. He just has to play as a unit at this point. Now to the Rams side of things, Matthew Stafford, it's been a tough season for him and not 100% all his fault. The offensive line hasn't been blocking and been banged up. Odell Beckham, they've obviously been missed. Allen Robinson really hasn't done anything. And it's been Cooper Kupp in this offense pretty much. And Tyler Higbee is the only two guys really making plays. The running game's been non-existent. Cam Akers, they're looking to trade. Kyron Williams, he might come back in this ball game, but we're not 100% sure about that as well. But with a tough matchup, even though I got torched last week, is this 49er defense. I would sit Matthew Stafford this week now to the Washington Commanders at the Indianapolis Colts. So a game with two quarterbacks who just became starters over the last couple weeks. So last week, Taylor Heineke, he knocked off Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. But this week here, a tougher matchup on the road versus Indianapolis in Indy, where their defense plays on another level when they're at home. So Taylor Heineke, he made a couple good plays, no doubt about it, for this Commander team. I think he's got decent weapons in Terry McLaurin and obviously Curtis Samuel and Jahan Dotson possibly coming back in this ball game. But I think this Colt defense is going to play good defense, and they want to get the second-year guy, Sam Elger, out the win column here is his Colt defense. So right now on the road, Heineke, he's probably going to be a different quarterback than he was at home versus Green Bay. And I got him as a sit this week. If you're in a two-quarterback league or deeper, maybe you consider starting him. But this week he's a sit, especially with only two teams in the Chargers and Chiefs on bye. Now to the Indianapolis Colts, Matt Ryan, after they traded a third-round pick for him in the offseason here. They've already benched him here going into Week 8. And Matt Ryan, he's taken a lot of hits this season. A lot of sacks, a lot of just QB pressures, and he's thrown a lot of interceptions as well on the season. So Matt Ryan, it was time for them to move on, they thought already, after a 7-game audition for this Indianapolis Colts team. So Sam Elway, they obviously have confidence in him. They said it's not an injury-related issue with Matt Ryan, even though his shoulder is banged up as well. And we'll see if this kid could get going. I know he's got some decent weapons in Michael Pittman, Paris Campbell, and Alec Pierce, who's emerged the last few weeks here. But right now, his Colts team's offensive line's in a shamble. I know they were working with Matt Ryan and getting that ball out quicker, and we'll see if they do the same thing here with Ellinger, or had just run heavy with Jonathan Taylor. But anyway, here versus a decent Commander defense over the last few weeks here, I would give Ellinger a bench this week. Green Bay Packers at the Buffalo Bills on Sunday Night Football. So right here, Aaron Rodgers, it's been a struggle for him for the most part this season compared to the MVP seasons he's put up over the last couple years. So Rodgers, he's topped out at 20 fantasy points as his max 5 times this season. But right here in a tough matchup on Sunday Night Football, Allen Lazard banged up. We don't know for sure if he's going to play. Romeo Doubs, it's been tougher for him over the last few weeks with more defenses rolling coverage his way. So he's been a guy not getting open and making plays for this Packer offense. And Sammy Watkins, I know he's back as a deep ball threat, but he's a guy you really can't count on. So with a tough matchup, this Packer team losing 3 ball games in a row versus winnable teams here, and Rodgers being up and down this season. He's a quarterback I would sit now to Josh Allen. What am I going to say? He's matchup proof. The best quarterback in fantasy football, either him or Patrick Mahomes, whoever you prefer. But right here, Josh Allen having a monster season. Has great weapons in Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, Singletary pretty decent out of the backfield. And with his legs alone, he could get you 10 points weekly on the ground. So right here, he's an obvious start. And then to the final game on Monday Night Football, the Cincinnati Bengals at the Cleveland Browns. So Joe Burrow, he's been on a tear now. And I think that Super Bowl hangover is over now for Joe Burrow and this Bengal team. Their offense is playing at a great pace. He's getting the ball down the field. Tyler Boyd's been more implemented into the offense lately, and they've been putting up huge numbers over the last 2 weeks. So Joe Burrow, the last 2 games, over 35 fantasy points in both games. And once again here versus a mediocre Brown defense in a division matchup on Monday Night Football, I think he has another great game, and he's a must-start this week. And now Jacoby Brissett, I know he's been all right as a fill-in, obviously, for Deshaun Watson, who's coming back in a few weeks after suspension. But Jacoby Brissett, he's just a guy that's up and down, and a guy only in deeper leagues I really would consider. So right now, Jacoby Brissett, I have as a sit this week. So that's week 8 quarterback starts a sit of every matchup of the fantasy football season.